Yeah, I should never have gotten into Twitter. Twitter's just a sewer.
Yeah.
Bad temptation to violate the 8th commandment repeatedly.
You don't have to jump into a sewer to know it's filthy.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode 38, brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. CooksHolsters.com. Here at Armed Lutheran Radio, we talk about faith, firearms, the Second Amendment, gun rights, the shooting sports, and self-defense in light of the Word of God, law, and gospel. How was your week? Mine was spent continuing to recover from the crud that plagued me last week, and as you can tell, I'm sounding a little more human again. I did manage to do some upgrade work on Glock 34, installed my 3.5-pound connector and a Vanek trigger housing, which allows me to adjust the pre-travel and the over-travel. Got a stainless steel guide rod and new recoil spring. I haven't gotten out to the range yet. It's on my to-do list, but this is the first bad cold of the season. Everybody at my house has had it. Some of us are, still dealing with the effects of it. It just hasn't been very conducive to getting out and shooting. Bending over hurts. Coughing hurts. My ears are constantly ringing. I have tinnitus as it is. So when I have a head cold, it's even worse. And I've got all this sinus pressure and headaches just about every day for a week. And so putting an ear pro and shooting guns just doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun to me at the moment. But hopefully that's going to change this week, and we'll get out to the range and try out the new gear. I want to thank all of you who posted comments over the last 2 weeks and who downloaded and listened to the show over the past 2 episodes. September was another record month for the show. Episodes 36 and 37 generated more interest than any other episode previously. The articles that Pastor Bennett and I fisked seemed to really get under people's skin and generated a lot of opinions. So thank you to everyone who downloaded and subscribed and listened and commented. Really appreciate your participation and your support for the show. Coming up on today's show, we've got another full show for you in store. Sergeant Bill is up first talking about IDPA, what it's for. Is it competition? Is it concealed carry? Or is it both? Aaron Israel has tips for what to do if you find yourself in your vehicle in the middle of an inner city riot, like what we saw in Charlotte recently. I'd intended to do an interview with Aaron a couple of weeks ago, right after the Charlotte riots. I didn't do it because of the cold, and Aaron picked up the ball and ran with it, and he's got a great tip about what to do if you find yourself in that very difficult situation. Mia has recovered from her trip to Europe to tell us about a new trip, a new adventure. Trip to West Virginia with Remington Arms to try out some of the company's new products, including the relaunched R51 pistol. And we finally get to interview Greg Hopkins, the author of A Time to Kill, The Myth of Christian Pacifism. I read and reviewed his book back in 2013, and I'm excited to finally have him on the show. All of that is straight ahead right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
Well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
With those words, our founding fathers changed the world. They launched an experiment in freedom, where common lawful citizens are free to speak and gather and worship as they choose. But first among those freedoms is the one freedom that makes the rest possible. For 130 years, we've worked to preserve freedom first. I'm Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio. Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Silvia.
This is your Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill. Today we're going to talk about IDPA. What's it for? Well, there's two schools of thought on IDPA, the International Defensive Pistol Association. One is it's concealed carry training and practice. The other is it's just a sport. It's just for fun. Now, I'll be the first to say that I agree with both of them. I will use a vest and a big full-size gun when I shoot my competitive matches because I like shooting that way. That's part of the fun. That's part of the game for me, and I enjoy that. But I will also occasionally use my carry gear. Now, an example for me of what I use as my competition IDPA gear would be a Glock 34 5-inch barrel 9mm and a pretty much made for competition nylon cover vest. But my carry equipment is totally different. I'll have an in-the-waistband holster with a Glock 19 is my everyday carry. The mag pouches for each are pretty much the same. They're usually on my belt, just single or double mag case, and that's pretty much the same for each one of those sets of gear. Now, in the 4 years I've been shooting competitively, shooting IDPA, the local club that I shoot with does some matches that they call Shoot What You Carry match. And everybody brings out their carry guns, their small little pistols and everything. And one of the common things that I've seen is most shooters are not as good with their carry gun and gear as they are with their competition gear. Now, is that because they don't shoot it very often or they don't use it very often? Well, I'd be willing to bet their carry gun gets a lot more use, just probably not as much training and practice. And because of that lack of training and practice, they don't shoot as well with it. It's a smaller gun, it might recoil more. Smaller guns are usually harder to shoot, so all that boils down to most people don't enjoy it as much. And when you have longer distance shots, 20, 25 yards, in an IDPA match, sometimes a little concealed carry gun can be really frustrating. But to me, that just means you need to use it more, practice with it more, get to know that carry gear. You should be almost as good with your carry gear as you are with your competition gear. I'm trying to use my carry gear more and more often, and I actually do enjoy it. But then again, I don't carry a really tiny gun. To me, a Glock 19 is about as close as you can get to a full-size gun while still being pretty easily concealable. Now, when I use my carry gear, I'll use it exactly the way I carry it. No special cover garments or any of that kind of stuff. I'm usually carrying under a shirt or under a t-shirt that's untucked, and that's how I'll shoot that match. Really good practice, really good to see how well your gear works and how well you work with it. To sum it all up, I guess you could say using your concealment vest and your big gun and your outside the waistband holster equals big fun, but it is the International Defensive Pistol Association, and if you carry a gun concealed to protect yourself and your loved ones, you need to get some practice with it. I need to get some practice with it. Let's go out and shoot a match with our carry gear. This has been your Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill.
Sergeant Bill Silvia is a 15-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department and masterclass competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
Can you survive the legal aftermath of self-defense? Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network can give you peace of mind knowing that you have the financial and legal assistance to face this new threat to your liberty, your property, and your good name. Become a member today for just $135 a year. Join Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network today. ArmedCitizensNetwork.com. Use the tracking code 15625 or Paul Lathrop.
Where gun culture meets the gospel. This is Armed Lutheran Radio. It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel with Fundamental Defense here with your personal defense tip of the week. This week I want to talk to you about what to do if you're ever caught in your vehicle during a riot in the inner city. First off, if you can avoid being anywhere near wherever a protest that could turn violent might take place, you're going to be far better off. Usually there's going to be some forewarning if you pay attention to the news about these things brewing and being likely to happen, and if you can avoid the areas where they're likely to happen, then that's going to obviously be your best bet, because being anywhere close to a riot is obviously a very dangerous situation to be in that could go very badly for you. So if you can avoid it altogether, that's going to be your best bet. However, if for whatever reason you find yourself in that situation, stuck inside your vehicle, surrounded by protesters, here's some things to consider. First off, stay in the vehicle if you can. If you can stay in your vehicle, it's going to give you an option to egress and get out of there, to find a different route, to get around the protesters, whatever. So if you can avoid getting out of the vehicle and confronting people on foot, that's going to be better off. Obviously, if you get out of your vehicle and have to fight with people on the ground, that's going to be highly more likely to get you injured or killed. So stay in your vehicle if you can. Next, lock your doors. As soon as you see people getting anywhere near your vehicle, your doors are probably already locked anyway if you're being smart, but definitely hit that lock button and make sure those doors are locked. Next, remove your seatbelt to give you better access to your defensive tools without having to be encumbered by the belt, and it also allows you a quicker egress if you do need to bail out of the vehicle for whatever reason. So unbuckle that seatbelt. Next, put a slight crack in your windows if you've got time to do it. It's actually harder to break a window that's cracked than it is one that's sealed because of the pressure differential. So open your window a little bit. It's going to make it harder for protesters or rioters to break in your window if they try to do that. Next, turn off your AC or your heat or whatever you have on that's blowing into the car. This will keep any smoke, tear gas, etc. that might be in the air around you from getting sucked into your ventilation system and inhibiting your ability to breathe and maybe forcing you to bail out of the car when you don't want to do that. Now, I've seen a lot of people on social media say that if they're surrounded by rioters blocking the road, that they'll simply run them down. And that's simply illegal, without saying anything else, if they're only blocking the road. So if you just run rioters over because they're blocking your rite of passage, that's going to end you up in jail with at least a vehicular assault charge, if not worse. However, the situation changes if the protesters attempt to assault you while you're in your vehicle. If they try to enter your vehicle, they try to pull you out of your vehicle, they try to flip your vehicle, they try to set it on fire, they fire guns at your vehicle, try to break your windows with objects or try to break it in any way. At that point, if you feel that you have no other way of escaping such an assault, which at that point it's a physical assault, then running them over would be justified to protect your lives and the lives of those in your vehicle. But if all they're doing is blocking the road, then you can't just run people over. But if they actually start to try to assault you while you're in your vehicle, that changes the situation, and using that type of deadly force might be justified. You might be forced to rapidly exit your vehicle if it becomes disabled or you're unable to escape the situation because of a roadblock or other obstructions. You can't get around it, you can't egress, you can't drive through the people that are trying to pull you out of the car. For whatever reason, you might have to get out. So for that reason, you should consider keeping your defensive tools on your body. So if you carry a gun, my recommendation is to have that gun on your person at all times, even when you're in the vehicle. If you have to mess around with a vehicle-mounted holster, dig in the glove box, get in the console, etc., when you're trying to egress the vehicle very quickly, that's going to be a problem. So you don't want to be digging around for your gun. Keep that gun on your body in the holster even when you're in the vehicle, and that's going to be your best option in case you have to bail out, or if you have to shoot from inside your vehicle, that's going to allow you to get access to that firearm quicker. Another thing to consider, if you've never been to a vehicle class and seen how bullets interact interact with auto glass, auto doors, what kind of cover there is on vehicles, things like that, learning how to fight with a gun around your vehicle, I would consider getting to that sort of training if this is a scenario that you want to be prepared for. If you are forced from your vehicle, if you have to egress, your first goal is obviously going to be able to deal with whatever threats are in the immediate area that you have to deal with right when you step out. And at that point, after you've dealt with your immediate threats, you're going to want to get to a position of advantage of some kind. If you can get inside of a building and barricade yourself from the people that are outside, lock a door, throw something in front of the door, keep those people from getting to where you are, that's going to be the best situation. Being inside of a structure of some kind where you can barricade yourself is obviously going to afford you way more security than trying to move around out in the open. So if you can get off the street and get into a safe spot of some kind, get a position of advantage, do that as quickly as you can, get on the phone with police and try to wait it out and try to get to safety as quick as you can. But being inside of a vehicle or inside of a structure is going to be safer than being out in the open with the rioters. You can find a more detailed article that I'm pulling a lot of these tips from actually at activeresponsetraining.net. Greg Ellifritz put out a great article about this a week or so ago. And if you haven't subscribed to his weekly knowledge dump, if you're not getting that in your email, if you're not seeing that on Facebook, make sure that you check out his weekly knowledge dump. He puts out a lot of great information about this stuff every Friday before lunchtime. So check out Greg Ellifritz over at activeresponsetraining.net. He's got a great article that a lot of these tips are going into more detail on. On the legal considerations, Andrew Branca, the attorney who wrote The Law of Self-Defense, a great book. If you haven't read that, you need to. He's over at legalinsurrection.com, and he wrote a good blog post last week about the legal considerations for using your vehicle as a weapon if you get in a situation where deadly force might be appropriate and what to consider there. So check out legalinsurrection.com and read Andrew's articles and subscribe to his stuff as well. He's probably the best there is out there on the legal piece. Being caught anywhere near a riot is obviously not a good situation. So unless you have some compelling reason to be close to the inner city where these sorts of things are likely to happen, you should go out of your way to avoid being in their vicinity. But there's some tips that you can use if you do find yourself in that situation. That's your personal defense tip for this week. Thanks for tuning in.
Aaron Israel is a Personal Defense Network contributor and owner of Fundamental Defense. You can find out more and sign up for any of Aaron's classes at fundamentaldefense.com.
Mission 160 Tactical and Armed Lutheran Radio are hosting Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense on October 22nd for a Fundamentals of Defensive Focus shooting class in Whitewright, Texas. Check the show notes for a link for more information and the website where you can sign up. Join me, Sergeant Bill, and Sergeant Mrs. Sergeant Bill for the one-day class for just $200. And if you use the promo code Lutheran, you'll save $40 off the class tuition.
It's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. I'm Alan Gottlieb, founder of the Second Amendment Foundation. When someone says we don't need that kind of gun, remind them the Founding Fathers determined what rights our Constitution should protect. There's a world of difference between rights and needs. It is not the function of government to tell us what we need or what we don't. Certainly no one needs an assault rifle or a Saturday Night Special, or for that matter, no one needs a Corvette with a high-capacity horsepower engine capable of speeds to 150 miles per hour. But in the hands of honest, responsible individuals, we have the right of choice. We have the right to read books others don't like. We have the right to listen to any radio program we choose. We have the right to dress the way we want to. We also have the right to own firearms of our choice. So the next time someone tells you you don't need something, tell them it's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. Join the Second Amendment Foundation today so that this message and our Bill of Rights might live. Call 425-454-7012. That's 425-454-7012.
Up next, it's Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstine.
Hello, here I am again, returning from yet another trip. This week, I headed to West Virginia for my first time with Remington Arms Company. They were hosting their new product seminar, which is a writer's event where they display their up-and-coming products. And the company took us to a fabulous location, which I highly recommend for a family vacation and adventure with friends, or, as with this event, for a business trip. The facility is called Adventures on the Gorge, and this rustic retreat has beautiful cabins, bunkhouses, and tent locations. It's kind of like camp for big kids as well as young. The lodge offers all sorts of outdoor activities for young and old. There's kayaking, ziplining, rafting, rock climbing, and more. But I had attended to view, review, put my hands on, and put some rounds downrange with the Remington firearms. We shot at the Summit Bechtel Range, which is the home of the National Boy Scout Jamboree, and these boys keep a beautiful range. I do really wish that I had had more time there, though, because Remington brought so many firearms, and the day simply ran short before I had a chance to put my hands on a lot of them. My first stop was at the handgun range. I ended up spending quite a bit of time there because they really do have some exciting releases in the works for their soon-to-be released pistols. That being said, some of you may know of the Remington R51. They introduced this gun a while back and then had a recall because of malfunctions. And if you're not familiar, in a nutshell, Remington introduced that firearm a little too quickly. It had gone through R&D, but in an attempt to get the innovative handgun out on production and at a deadline date, they released that model a bit prematurely. And being a company of integrity, which I must say right off, I am not sponsored by Remington. I will tell you that I highly support a number of companies that have outstanding customer service. And Remington really has that. Remington's customer service is probably the key reason that they are currently celebrating their 200th year. So I just wanted to clarify that. They are not paying me to tell you this information. But I also wanted to tell you, I have a couple of friends who have the original R51 model that came out not long ago, and they've said that they're really happy with the ones that they have and that the firearms have performed flawlessly. So I don't know. Due to the scores of other people reporting malfunctions having to do with slide locks and magazines, Remington did issue a recall, and they are taking all of those R51 models back. So after a complete redesign, they've relaunched a new and improved re-engineered handgun. So this improved design has a fast reset trigger, it has a more durable, aggressive extractor, it has an enhanced recoil spring, and several other modifications. In this relaunch, Remington is truly embracing their second chance, which they have been given by us, the consumer. And the appeal to this R51 model is, first of all, it's chambered in 9mm, so you have a really good quality defense round. But also, this handgun itself, it has a super slim design with smooth lines that make it producing it from a concealed location a breeze. You can quickly pull it without any snags or hiccups. So it's really a great concealed carry gun. And in Remington's relaunch of this totally redesigned pistol, they have tested thousands of rounds downrange. And I don't mean that they've just put the pistol in a vise or other controlled scenario. They have actually had thousands of employees, some of which are frequent shooters and others that rarely shoot, and even some that have never shot before at all. So these varieties of experience levels and grip tactics and techniques behind the trigger really did test the effectiveness of the gun as well as the reliability of that newly engineered R51. For me, shooting the pistol at the range was indeed a breeze. That block design and the grip angle, they worked in such a way that the recoil seemed really minimal. And the muzzle rise also, there was not much to it at all. But as I said, I really would have enjoyed more time at the range, not just with this handgun, but also with those soon-to-be released models that I mentioned. But alas, the world keeps turning and days come to an end. So I didn't get to try a lot of the other guns, but I wanted to share it with you because it's really some exciting stuff. And I also wanted to tell you, Remington definitely learned its lesson with that first failed premature attempt on launching that innovative pistol, but they are definitely not going to make that mistake again with any up-and-comers. So keep an eye out. There are some really good things coming in handguns as well as rifles and shotguns from that Remington Armed Company, and you definitely want to try them. Have a great week. Cheers, and I'll share my next adventure with you next week.
You can read more from Mia and watch her YouTube videos at miaanstine.com.
So you have your concealed carry permit or license to carry. Now what? Now you need a good holster. Not one of those cheap neoprene prophylactic holsters you can buy in the big box stores. You need a holster custom built for the firearm you intend to carry every day. Check out cooksholsters.com. Made in the USA, Cooks holsters are available in a wide range of colors and designs for inside the waistband or outside waistband carry. They carry a lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guaranteed. Visit www.cooksholsters.com and use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and take 15% off everything in the store. You put in the time and effort to legally carry a firearm for personal protection. Protect your firearm with a custom holster from cooksholsters.com.
This is Pastor Brian Wolfmueller of Table Talk Radio. Thank goodness you're listening to the Armed Lutheran Radio podcast.
Welcome back to the show. I am excited to finally be interviewing today's guest. He's an attorney, a former prosecutor, a certified use of force instructor. He trains police and civilians in the use of force, and he's written one of my favorite books on self-defense, A Time to Kill, The Myth of Christian Pacifism. Greg Hopkins, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Thank you so much, Lloyd, for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's talk a little about your background. You've seen all sides of the justice system as a police officer, as a judge, a defense attorney, and a prosecutor.
And I've also had 2 stints on the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals, 23 years apart, as a clerk for 2 different appellate judges. And so I've got a pretty good grasp of the entire justice system, and I've put cuffs on people. I've made night traffic stops. I know how a cop's stomach feels when he walks up to a car at night and doesn't know who or what is in there. And so I could get a little empathy from my audience when I was teaching cops and detention officers back about 20 years ago. So it was good, but also I've seen it from all sides, and plus the appellate process, and that really helped me when I was putting the book together.
Well, I reviewed the book back in 2013. What made you decide to write the book in the first place? What was the motivation behind the book?
Well, it seemed to me as a committed Christian, when I got this urge to start getting into self-defense and firearms collecting, that kind of thing, I had to deal with this idea. What does it mean when Jesus says turn the other cheek? What does it mean to live by the sword, die by the sword? And I felt like I had to come to some kind of conclusion. Because if we say to Jesus in any part of our life that, well, Lord, you can have 95% of my life, but that gun thing, just butt out. Well, in at least in that part of my life, am I not a practical atheist?
Right.
So either Jesus is Lord or he's not. So I began to start looking at things, and I have to credit Masad Ayub in his 1983 book, The Truth About Self-Protection. He had a chapter called The Will to Resist. And it was at that point, from a few of his comments, I said, I really need to get into this and start studying. By the time I hit law school in '85, I had some principles down, and by the end of law school, I had a Bible study done. And I took it to a couple of churches, and nobody disagreed with me, so I knew I had to be wrong. And then in '99, I had put my ideas together in an 18-page booklet that kind of laid out an outline of the things I was thinking. But I realized I had to do a lot more than that. By that time, though, I'd convinced myself that the Bible did support the idea of self-defense, and it was biblically based. It was in 2007, after doing a lot of research and so on, I actually began to write the book, and we published in January of 13. And the reason I wanted to share it was, first of all, if you're a Christian, we are already hardwired not to kill our fellow man. And if some guy jumps out of an alley with a knife, that is not the time to have a discussion, a theological discussion with yourself. Is Jesus going to be okay with me if I blow this joker away? Okay? And so there's a hesitation, and hesitation means you lose in a confrontation. The criminal almost always has the advantage of initiating kind of confrontation, and therefore he already has an advantage. First of all, I wanted Christians to know, and Jews, that God blesses their defense of themselves and their families. I wanted them to know that not only that, but the morality that we have in our criminal laws actually derives from the Bible. That's why when I talked about burglary, Exodus 22:3, a man breaking in at night can be killed. Then I showed the Alabama statute, and I showed other statutes from other states that were similar. And when I talked about kidnapping in chapter 14, in Genesis 14, about Abram rescuing Lot. Then, of course, I talked about kidnapping statutes, and same with Moses. In Alabama, first or second degree or felony assaults can be met by the victim or third party with deadly force. And that was obviously what Moses was dealing with at that point, and so on through. So people could see that God's morality is eternal, and it reflects even in our state statutes.
Well, here's a little excerpt from my review back in 2013. What surprised me pleasantly were the chapters which strayed from biblical interpretation and instead dealt with training and legal issues. Much of the book reads like a self-defense training manual, written from a biblical perspective. There are chapters about preparation and mindset and awareness, pepper spray, and other less than lethal defensive options, the law and judicious use of force. For the Christian who is interested in purchasing a firearm for home or self-defense or getting a concealed carry permit, this book should be required reading. Why did you write it the way you did? I mean, you started out looking to figure out what the Bible says about self-defense. I recommended it to friends along with In the Gravest Extreme by Massad Ayoob.
Yeah, that's a very high compliment. But the idea was, see, I'm really a teacher. I've been teaching the Bible since I was 18 to other people, and I am a certified teacher. I've taught in Tennessee, Alabama, and Ohio, and taught for 7 years before I went to law school. And after I closed my practice, I taught for a year and a half days here in Alabama at a high school. And my motto is context is everything. And I wanted, another plan I had for the book was I wanted people to not only see it as a Bible study, but for atheists even, or agnostics, to be able to pick up this book and recognize that God is the most rational and logical being in the universe, and that he cares about our well-being. Jeremiah 29:11, I have plans for you, plans for good and not for evil, plans for prosperity and not for calamity. And that since that is the case, I wanted people to understand how the biblical principles mesh into the principles that we are taught in self-defense, because the whole point of the book is to get our minds ready to exercise self-defense and be justifiable before the law. And to do so, you have to throw in those kind of principles that you will hear to help people make that transition, say when they're sitting in Ayoub's classes or someone else, Greg Elfritz, or any of these other fine instructors out there, to put it all together so that they'll have the context and say, hey, God's word fits into all facets of my life.
Chapter 21 really sticks out to me. I wanted to talk to you about that one because you analyze the Sermon on the Mount, and it's an area where anti-gunners are always keen to use a lot of Jesus' words for their own purposes. Blessed are the peacemakers, love your enemies, don't worry, you shouldn't worry about what could happen to you. That was one that we talked about recently in one of our segments with Pastor Bennett. It was like, Christ says don't worry about things, so you shouldn't worry about the guy coming to break down your door. If it's your time, it's your time. Mm-hmm. You look at those passages a little bit differently. You analyze those in a different way than a lot of the quote-unquote liberal Christians would.
Yeah. There's, and the whole thing, it's about personal honesty, Lloyd. If you're going to examine a subject like this, then don't be afraid to look at God's word and see what it says. See, and one of the things I did is this book is not simply about, getting the upper hand on bad guys. It's about how that correlates and is incorporated into our Christian lifestyle. I mean, once again, back at the Old Testament, some of my chapter titles are God's pattern for self-defense in the Old Testament, mindset and preparation, do justly, love mercy, walk humbly, am I my brother's keeper, law and mercy, vengeance is thine, Lord, not mine, and bringing the criminal under control. Now, so what I tried to do throughout was show that this power of this gun on your hip has to be controlled entirely by your walk with Christ. But so when I was going to explain, before I can explain, turn the other cheek, I can't just pull Matthew chapter 5:21 to the end of the chapter without dealing with the Beatitudes, one of the most famous parts of the New Testament. And so so I entitled the chapter "Turning Good Intention into Action," and I talked about the things that, the blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Well, that doesn't mean we walk around thinking I'm pond scum, I'm no good, I don't measure up. That's not what God wants to do. He wants us to be recognize our need for His love and His wisdom and His patience. See, this is what mankind was created for in the Garden of Eden, was to reflect God's personality, which includes humor. I think God has a sense of humor, and that's
I believe He does.
In my classes, I make people laugh, and try to make you laugh here with it. And the thing is, we're simply admitting we can't do it on our own. And we know from James tells us the anger of man does not accomplish the will of God. Now, anger is something we're going to feel when that guy attacks us or our wife or anything like that. But there is a justifiable anger. It's the anger that goes on to malice. I point out in here that anger says, "How dare you?" And malice says, "I'll get you for that."
Right.
So, and that's what we want to stay away from, is the "I'll get you for that," because then we take the path toward vengeance. And it's blessed are those who mourn, and for they shall be comforted. Well, I give the example of Susanna Gracia Hupp, who, after the Luby's massacre, where she lost both of her parents and 19 other people were killed, she did something. She got the Texas legislature to install concealed carry in Texas for the first time since the 1870s. Yep. And then we have meek is not weak. This is
explain that one to me. I like that title.
Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Okay, once again, this is where the pacifists later came up with the idea, we're just going to have to take it, whatever it is. But in fact, they didn't. I mean, when the barbarians came in, they fought them. That's the only reason Christianity survived, is because there was organized resistance. Now, in a situation where it's the government and so on, I explain very carefully in the book that, first of all, that we're supposed to pray for government. And government in the New Testament, since we're no longer under a theological form of government, then it's the government that sets the rules for criminal law, and we obey those. And Paul makes that very clear in 1 Timothy chapter 1, and also in Romans 13, verses 1 through 7. The government does not bear the sword in vain, for instance. And so by allowing us by deputizing us, as if you will, as concealed carriers, the government makes us part of that sword that is properly and for the good of society worn all the time. But meekness is not weakness. The classical Greek here, there's many examples of it, connotes the idea, when you use the Greek word meek, it's of a highly trained hunting dog or a highly trained war horse. You think about Alexander's legendary horse, Bucephalus, an animal that is ready at a moment's notice to spring to the exact command of its master. And that is what Jesus was. He was, the Hebrew writer tells us he set his face like flint toward the cross, okay, and the fate that awaited him. He was completely at the will of his Father, which he reiterated. He pointed out to Satan when he was tempted. Said, "Look, man," it says, "we're going to do what God says," and that's what meekness is. Meekness is not, once again, it's not the idea that you stand around and take anything, supposedly witnessing for Christ. If Christians are not alive, then our witness is over. All right, and that's what Christians did not rebel against the Roman Empire. Number one, they would have been slaughtered. There was no successful attempt at rebellion against the Roman Empire at any point. And if you did, Tacitus tells us that this is Roman speaking for him, says, we make a desert and we call it peace. They would get the Christians would get their non-Christian friends and neighbors killed as well, as happened to the Jews on 2 occasions, in 60 to 66 AD, and in the first Jewish revolt, and then the second Jewish revolt in 124. So this idea of Jesus being meek, when Jesus needed to stand up to the money changers, to the Pharisees, he told, they said, Herod's out to get you. He says, you go tell that fox that I'll get there in my own time, and there's nothing he can do. Then there's blessed are the merciful, which I talk about in the chapter about Micah 6:4. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly. And it's give the other guy a break.
That segment really, that's something you will not see talked about in a self-defense discussion. The Bible teaches us that we're saved by grace through faith, not through our own works, but that good works naturally will flow from our faith.
Exactly.
You talk about serving our neighbor, including the neighbor that attacks us.
Right.
By going and visiting him in the hospital, in prison, witnessing to them, forgiving them.
So some of the people that I admire most are Christians that go into the prisons and the jails and try to help these folks. I got folks in my own congregation that do it. What you understand after you've been in the criminal justice system for a while, and I have the privilege of seeing it both from the prosecution side and from the defense side. I have sat in 3x5 little closets on folding chairs with my clients, and these are people that from the time they were 5 years old, they knew they were going to jail. Mom's been to jail, dad's been to jail, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, everybody goes to jail. It's a cost of doing business in life. And if after we are, and I've been criticized in 2 of the reviews on Amazon about this because I advocate this, although I clearly say if it is safe to do so, then render first aid. But you shouldn't render first aid because, well, first of all, if you can render first aid, if the guy is no longer a threat, I'm not saying close with a guy that's still actively fighting and stuff like this. I'm saying if possible at all. Now, number one, from just a practical standpoint of a good lawyer, it looks great in front of a jury. But the main thing is, you can't do that. But if you hospitalize him or he jailed, and we know that 96% of the time, the criminal either runs away or plays good puppy and waits for the police. If you jail this guy, if you go to him, knowing that you have no obligation to him, and talk to him, when now you have control and you have an ability to witness, when we know from the studies that I cite that there's a 75-80% chance that the criminal is high when he commits his crime. So it doesn't matter if you say, oh, yes, of course, Mr. Robber, take my coat. I'm supposed to give you that. And here's my wallet. And in my wallet, you'll find my address. My 22-year-old beautiful daughter is home. She'll do anything you want in Jesus' name. Jesus loves you. And he's not going to remember any of that, let alone it's ridiculous. But he's sobered up by the time you get to him. And no one else probably, it's highly likely in his life, no one else has come to his hospital bed and said, I care about you. And no one else has come to his cell except for these wonderful people but as an individual, and certainly not any of his victims have ever come and said, look, I personally forgive you, but I'm not going to do anything stupid like drop the charges. Because these sociopaths are, let me tell you, this, that you drop the charges, they're just at a, woo, did it again, got away with it, and they're back, that's one of the reasons I got it. It was mainly because of my health, but it was like clockwork. You get, okay, Joey, I got you this great deal, and here's how you stay out of prison, and here's how you succeed on parole. And 6 months later, you go up to your courthouse box. There's a probation revocation warrant from the probation officer. It's Joey had a dirty drug test. Joey committed another crime. A lot of people are just too stupid to be free, Lloyd. I mean, as a friend of mine, a lawyer friend of mine says, they're trying to break into jail. They like it better there. But in any case, this idea, if you go talk about, and this is something that I talk about again in the book, the example of Jesus going the second mile. When did the Jew have a witness? During the first mile, when the Roman knew that the Jew was afraid of his sword and the law? Or when he suddenly said, hey, Marcus, I think you're a pretty good guy. Why don't we walk on a little bit longer? And I said, hey, have you heard this one? The high priest and the Pontifex Maximus walk into a bar. Once that Jew has volunteered to go the second mile, then and only then have we created an opportunity to witness, because now the bad guy knows that we are there on our own when we could be anywhere else in the world. And that, I guarantee, will make an impression. It might not cause him to become a Christian right then, but it may be just one more thing that the Holy Spirit works on him, and 15 years later, all of a sudden the light bulb clicks on.
You wrote this book about the myth of Christian pacifism. Where does this myth come from? You mentioned in the book that the idea dates back to the father of church history, Eusebius, and the fall of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
This is an old idea.
Oh, yes. And Eusebius, remember, he was writing in the 4th century. But actually, it came from Tertullian and Origen. Origen was a little older than Tertullian. And I must say, if you get into Tertullian, you find out that in his life, he was on both sides of every argument he was ever in at one point or another. So he's not a real good person to base some kind of a doctrine on. But both of them came up with this idea in the late 2nd century. It was somewhere between 150 and 175 that these guys came up with it. So they were actually in the 2nd or 3rd tier from the apostles. And it was they who injected this idea of pacifism. Now, we know that pacifism did not catch on. People say, well, the Christians, they didn't have revolts. Well, yes, as I've said, there's practical reasons. Beside the fact that we're supposed to obey the government, and Paul tells us, as much as it lies with you, be at peace with all men. We're exhorted over and over, Peter, to pray for the king, everything like that. And this is while the kings were people like Nero, one of the most evil men who ever lived. Yet, we get to the late 3rd century, and just at the time of Constantine, and we find when Constantine wins the empire from Maxentius, then both of them had Christian generals in their staffs, not let alone thousands of Christian soldiers. It was by that time, it was another 150 years after Origen and Tertullian that some people began to think this way. There is no mention at all that the Roman Empire fell because all of a sudden all the Christians decided to sit back and either join the church. Now, that it is true, what happened was after the persecutions were over, what happened when it became easy to be a Christian under Constantine, a lot of Christians, people who were just, now this Christian thing is a good thing to be part of. So I'm going to quit being a, priest of Orpheus, and I'll just get in on this Jesus thing. After all, I was a dying and rising God anyway, and I can get into this gig, and then I can either get into the government.
I can hang with the cool kids.
Yeah, or I can get into the church, and I won't have to serve in the army. But either case. It was, and that is when the church itself began to decline and lose its kick, if you will, in the world. Was when the world co-opted it. under Constantine. The point is that it's never actually become a doctrine of the Catholic Church or any other church, but we've had through history this idea that Christians aren't supposed to fight back. But if we hadn't fought back, we'd all be Muslim now. Okay.
That's right. Pastor Bennett and I talk about that a lot. The Battle of Vienna, the gates of Vienna, we would have. That would have been the end of it.
Fortunately, it has not permeated Christianity entirely, But the point that I make in the book is pacifism is not found in the Bible. Jesus beat up the money changers. And as I say, he passed up every single opportunity he had to preach pacifism. If Jesus is a pacifist, now remember, Jesus Christ is saying yesterday, today, and forever. The answer, folks, is, of course, Jesus was not a pacifist, but it was not part of his earthly mission to physically defend himself or his apostles. He was divinely protected. Look at John 17:12 with his prayer to his Father. He says, all those you've given me, except for Judas, I have protected. They were under divine protection too. But then in Luke 22, he says, now, guys, wait a minute. Remember when you went out on missions before, I told you don't take anything with you, no wallet, no knapsack, no sleeping bag. He says, now I'm about to leave. And when I leave, you're going to have to sell your cloak and buy a sword. That was not Jesus' mission. He was here to die as an unprotesting sacrifice.
So down to the big question. We hear all these liberal theologians. They preach that Christ would not have condoned the use of guns. You clearly make the argument that Christ was not this hippie peacenik that these kind of people seem to think that he was. Why do you think so many Christians today think that that's who Jesus was?
Well, because we are not actually interested in knowing Jesus. I was in the very same situation as the Pharisees until I was about 40 years old. I knew a whole lot about the Bible. I knew a whole lot about God. And then suddenly I realized I knew very, very little. I did not actually know God. I did not actually know Jesus. I spent a lot of time building up, hey, I know where that proof text is. I know where that proof text is. And that's where the Pharisees were. And it's because they didn't understand the Old Testament that they weren't able to recognize Jesus, or more likely they refused to recognize Jesus when he came. And it was at about age 40, oddly enough, right after my first kid came along, it was then I began to realize some of these things, and I began to seek to know Jesus. People aren't presenting that we get a preconceived idea. Jesus was a pacifist, and then we don't look at the Bible with fresh eyes. Now we know from the Ten Commandments, if you say a negative, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal, then it implies that we are to do the opposite. If we're not supposed to steal, then we should be giving. If we're not supposed to murder, we should be preserving life. If we're not supposed to commit adultery, even in our thought life, we should be strengthening other people's marriages and our own. If I'm a good daddy, I teach my kids, teach them to cross the street safely, teach them to drive a car safely, teach them to maybe defend themselves safely. All these, teach them to swim. Now, every year about 7,000 people drown in this country, and about 70% of those never intended to be in the water in the first place. Okay, so it might be a good survival skill. Teach your kids to swim. Same thing here. The pacifism means that we're not really trying to understand Jesus. We're trying to look at the Bible and with our political and spiritual opinions, and then find a proof text for it. And if you do that, if you take text out of context, it's not context, it's pretext. Let me tell you a quick story. My editor, he gave the book to his preacher, and he's in Church Christ, okay? Mm-hmm. The preacher in 2 weeks came back and said, about halfway through Greg's book, and I want to tell you that this has challenged me on a particular point of the Bible more than any other Christian book I've ever read. Didn't tell how or why or anything. 3 weeks later, he came to Ed and he said, Ed, I want to tell you something. I finished Greg's book and said, I want to tell you something you don't know. I was a certified, registered, conscientious objector during Vietnam. He says, I want you to know that thanks to Greg's book, I'm no longer a pacifist. And the next month, Lloyd, he went out and bought a shotgun and a revolver.
Fantastic.
So
Greg Hopkins is an attorney and certified instructor in the use of force law and the author of A Time to Kill, The Myth of Christian Pacifism. It's one of my favorite books, and I recommend you go and get it. It's on my website under the books section and recommended gear. Greg, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Lloyd, thank you so much. It's been a joy, and you were one of the first people that really that boosted the book and gave me such a fine, thoughtful review. I will always be grateful for all you've done to help me out, and anytime you need me, give me a call.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too, sir. Thank you.
And that's going to wrap it up for another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. Thank you to my wonderful cast, Aaron Israel, Sergeant Bill Silvia, and Mia Anstine for their contributions to the show. And thank you to our special guest, Greg Hopkins, for joining us today. And thank you, dear listener, for listening, downloading, and subscribing. I hope you'll join us again next week for another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.